serve and protect our community. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk Horvath, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Madam President. Trustee Chen.
Here.
Trustee Fink.
Here.
Trustee John.
Here.
Trustee Rudolph.
Here.
Trustee Sifferman.
Here.
And Trustee Terrell.
Here.
Thank
All
you.
present.
Thank you. Does any trustee have an addition or deletion to tonight's agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to citizen comments. This is the time that we open up the meeting to the public to address the board. Would anyone like to speak to the board this evening? Please, come on up.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
My name's Kirk Wolf. I live at 4096 Western Avenue in Western Springs.
Yes.
So right along the bridge, the pedestrian bridge that's in discussions about being, whether to locate it there or located on 47th Street. Just want to say that we sent a note representing 11 families to the board over the weekend, and just wanted to share probably some of the thoughts that we detailed in the letter and some of the things that we're concerned about as residents. Clearly, there's a bridge there today, and none of us are opposed to that bridge. Most of that bridge was there when most of us moved in. But the new design for the bridge is very, we have a lot of concerns with it. First of all, being the privacy. So the new bridge that is being discussed, the walkway to it has to be ADA compliant, and it's raised and elevated. And that will cut back behind our yards and will be elevated and will give a very good view of many of our homes to people who are standing or sitting or going up the bridge. Many of us here have preteen children. That makes us very uncomfortable that this giant structure will be sitting behind our house. The next thing we wanted to actually talk about was the safety itself. That area today, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it or not, but back behind the berm is a big party area for whether it's teens or many cases we've seen people older than teens there. There is a collection of beer cans, drug paraphernalia. We have found mattresses back there. There is patio furniture back there. It's a mess. And it's an odd stretch of land, as I don't believe it's owned by the village. I think it's actually owned by the tollway. And so there's a little bit of a back and forth of who's actually responsible for maintaining the safety of that. We try to keep our children from going back there, but occasionally 30 or 40-year-olds will wander up across the berm today. As they continue to look at taking this area and doing something else with it, we're concerned around the safety. Is there going to be lighting? If so, is that lighting going to be obtrusive to people that live there? Is there going to be cameras? What would we know about the privacy relative to cameras? The next thing we just want to talk about is our property values. Really concerned with having this big structure behind our homes. We all live relatively close to the highway today. None of us were thrilled that it was expanding, but that was an action that was going to be taken. But overall, having this giant concrete structure, I assume you've all seen some of the drawings of it, is really going to have a negative effect on the value of our homes. We look at this site compared to the 47th Street site, which doesn't have, I think, any residential impacts to it. And we're just really concerned about a decision that would put this behind our homes and drive down our property value, endanger our safety, and create some privacy issues for our families as a whole. So I just wanted to make sure that we shared with you guys how we were feeling as a group. There's 11 families that have signed on to this letter. I think there's 10 on here. I sent a note to Ms. Gallagher with one more family who signed on to it all. We all live on Western Avenue. We're all right in that Maple Western area. So just wanted to share our concerns and anything we can do to answer any questions, or if you guys want to come out and see the area back behind our house, we're happy to do what we can, but just wanted to share how we were feeling.
Thank you very much. Trustee Chen, did you want to? Trustee Chen is chairman of the Properties and Rec Committee. So Trustee Chen, did you want to address the scheduling of discussion?
Yes. So we just received a packet of information, including the survey results, recommendations from Chief Buds, from other members of the staff, and we will be discussing it at our next committee meeting, which I don't know if it's totally been scheduled yet, but December 2nd. December 2nd for the Properties and Recreation Committee at 6 PM.
Is that something that we could?
Yes, of course, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, good point. Our attorney just said, for your reference, all of our committee meetings, commission meetings, board meetings, they're all public meetings, and you are always welcome to attend all the meetings, if you have nothing better to do. Does anyone else want to address the board? Please. Good evening.
Klaus Cook,
Yes.
4457 Johnson Avenue. I just saw something on the agenda regarding final costs and disbursements and things like that for Foxford Station, and it may not be the appropriate place. This had something to do with roadway, but I live just east of Foxford Station on Johnson Avenue. When the project was presented to the village, they had beautiful renderings of all sides of the buildings. The Johnson Avenue portion had all kinds of new trees to complement the mature existing trees that are along there. The only thing we have now is one little bush that in 5 or 10 years might cover the huge gas meter that's there, and we have a forest of big green ComEd boxes. Is any additional landscaping planned for the east side of the building?
That's a good question. Director Super,
As it relates at least to the road project, there was nothing that the village was doing in additional to the road project?
No, this was just for Foxford Station.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. I'd have to coordinate with Director Scott on that, to find out what the status is and where that relates to the plan review and the plan process for the development. So I can touch base with Director Scott and we can follow back up with you regarding.
I just wanted to find out, because they
Sure.
recently did some mulch and some seeding, and like I said, they planted one bush,
okay,
so I was hoping that wasn't the end of it.
okay.
To the best of my knowledge, I do not think it is the end of it. Tonight, what they're discussing pertains to the road project
Okay.
itself.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board this evening? Nope. Hearing none, we will move on to consideration of the agenda items during the workshop portion of tonight's meeting. Agenda item number 1 is the Properties and Recreation Committee. Trustee Chen.
I have nothing to report other than we will be discussing the Tollway Pedway proposal in our next meeting and some other items, but nothing at this time.
Thank you.
We speak up a little bit or get the mic working, somebody's hard to understand.
Oh,
Can you hear me now? Is it working?
I think it's a
Oh.
little better, yeah.
Okay.
These mics are very sensitive. If
Okay.
it's too close, it's booming, and if it's too far, I guess you don't hear it.
Do you want me to repeat what I said?
I can't really hear you.
No? Okay. Okay, so nothing to report at this time, except that we will be having our Properties and Recreation Committee meeting on December 2nd, where we will be further discussing the tollway pedestrian proposal at that meeting at 6 PM. But I have nothing else to report at this time.
Thank you very much, Trustee Chen.
welcome.
Moving on to Public Works and Water Committee, Trustee Fink.
All right. I have 2 engineering service agreements with Baxter and Woodwin that we'd like to bring forward to the omnibus voting next week. The first one is Phase 1 engineering, not to exceed $21,000 to repaint the elevated storage water tanks. It's a 1 million gallon elevated water storage tank that will be repainted in 2020. And the second one is a proposal for loan assistance not to exceed $16,000. That is assistance in the application for a low-interest loan through the Public Water and Supply Program. Central Avenue update. So Central Avenue, just east of Spring Rock Park. Director Supert and staff met with IDOT and the Federal Highway Administration last month. They had 4 points that they wanted to get across. The first one, that their Central Avenue will have to be enlarged 11 feet each. It'll be 11 feet each way for driving and 4 feet on each side for parking. So Central Avenue, when that project is going forward, will be 4 feet wider. The crosswalk at Central and Elm will have to be brought to ADA standards. We'll need a letter of support from the Park District, which we have already. And IDOT thought the plan to go to bid September 2020 was a little premature, that it might not happen until January 2021. So that's in the works.
Did you mention the public meeting on that? There will be a public meeting.
Oh, yes. So there's, before the end of the year, there'll be a public meeting on that. Once the date is set out, invites will be sent to the local, the neighbors there.
Thank you.
And also, sorry, on that, can we just go back over the original, the reason that this is, the project is being undertaken, just as an overall reminder?
Yeah, so it is, Matt, please, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's gonna be cementing the roads and putting, separating the sewer and the rainwater and the sewer systems.
Correct, yeah, so that area of town has a combined sewer area, which means your stormwater and sanitary water go into the same pipe. Part of the village's goal with what we call our long-term control plan, which is on the village's website, is to separate those combined sewer areas. We have a number of areas of town that get backup from storm events, especially in the basements. And specifically on Central Avenue, there's an area just north of 47th Street, about 3 or 4 houses in, that continually has on-street flooding from storm events. So the village has several grants, federal, and one through Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, to begin separation of the storm sewer in that area, and then also reconstruct the street in concrete.
Matt, can you also briefly describe the planning process for this?
Yeah, so this planning process is quite a bit more complex than our village's standard road project. Because we are using federal funds, the road portion will be handled through the Federal Highway Administration, and then the sewer portion would be handled through Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So the village held our first kickoff meeting, as Trustee Fink mentioned, just at the end of October here with IDOT and the Federal Highway Administration. Through that process, we'll be meeting with them several times, and they will identify requirements as part of the federal highway standard that we need to accomplish because we're using federal funds for the project. As he noted, widening of the street is one thing that the Federal Highway Administration is requiring, because the street is a connector street that connects Burlington Avenue, which connects to the downtown, to 47th Street. It's not considered a residential street. That's why it's eligible for federal funds. So there's certain federal standards that we have to bring the street up to as part of the process to receive those federal funds. So that will all be kind of discussed in a bit more detail once we do have the public meeting process.
And the timing for this, how, with the grants, is this just something where the eligibility is somewhat, and the timing is somewhat out of our control? Obviously, this is going to be concurrent to the shoe fly, and so that whole area of Central is going to experience quite a bit of disruption at the same time.
Yes, so the timing process is driven by the grant process. It's an FAU route grant process. One of the things we did earlier this year, if the board recalls, we decided to basically accelerate the engineering a bit because we were starting to back up against the timing in which we could utilize the funds. If we didn't begin to commit the funds in the project before the end of this year and begin engineering, we would actually lose the funds. So we had to begin engineering this year. Construction, as Trustee Fink mentioned, will probably actually occur in 2021. Because it's a federal process, it takes a lot of time. As I mentioned, we'll be going back to the Federal Highway Administration and meeting with them multiple times to give them status updates and receive feedback from them as the project progresses, the design progresses forward.
Okay, yeah, the flooding there is really bad, and it happens every time, so certainly appreciate the end goal here. It's just, the widening, I think, is a bit of a surprise.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that at the public meeting and get some more information about that.
Okay.
We are very, very early in the design at this point, so we don't have the full layout. Our first meeting with the Federal Highway Administration was a kickoff meeting, essentially, where they kind of outlined the boundaries of the project and the scope of what we are looking to accomplish. And those 4 items were kind of the 4 main topic points that we came away with direction from them that we'll be working on moving forward. They also requested, as part of the federal process, that we do this public meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Fink, thank you.
Right. Moving on to the capital summary report. Well 5, the drilling is complete. The fencing has been taken down, and the village is looking to proceed to the phase 3 to schedule bidding for the electrical and the pumping equipment. The bids are anticipated to go out around October 24th and opened up around December 5th. The transmission main, so that is the piping that's going to connect the well to the osmosis plant, has been, the construction on the street has been complete this past week. The standpipe has been repainted, and they're going to start to fill that in the next 7 to 10 days. And they're going to start putting the cell equipment on top of on the standpipe again. The 2018 roadway program. This is the project on Johnson Avenue between 47th to Burlington and Lawn from 47th to Elm. So fantastic news. The contract cost was $1,690,000 and $1,690,646, but the final cost was only $1,610,189. So there's a total change in $81,505, which is great, 4.87% lower than the contracted price. There's a memo for the engineering costs, which are below as well. We're looking for a budget amendment on this same omnibus for the roadway referendum project of $28,220.45. So as we're talking about Johnson Avenue, Foxford Station did the north part of Johnson, and the village did the south part of Johnson, and there's a little spot in between that wasn't going to get done. And then April 5th of this year, we approved the funds for it, just to make sure it's one completed project. The roadway program, the east and west lane, so this is the 2019 roadway program. The east and west lanes of Clausen have been completed and reopened. And there's going to be things that are going to happen yet, are regrading of the parkways and installation of new sod that might not happen until spring, depending on the weather. Let me see, what else? Oh, so last week we had big storms, and a lot of residents came out to discuss flooding in Franklin Street of Springdale and Ridgewood. And after looking into it, the staff looked into it, and we're looking to meet with engineers to address this problem in the next month. Now, well 4, right when we're through with all of our water problems, well 4 needs maintenance. So since spring of this year, they've noticed the pumping pressure has been going down. And in the summer, we have 3 wells in Western Springs. 2 of the wells we need for use in summer, but in winter, we'll only need 1 well. So there's some planned maintenance on well number 4 that's going to occur. So usually, these wells need to be maintained every 7 to 10 years, and it's been 8.5 years since the last maintenance. It's just unfortunate timing that well 5 is not up and running before this occurs. Matt, did you want to have
Yeah,
a presentation?
so I'll take a moment to kind of elaborate on that. So in your packet, there's a memo from Superintendent Duffy that kind of outlines the maintenance process. We also have here this evening, if there's any questions, a bed from Suez Well, who will be planned to do the work. What we're looking to do is preventative maintenance. This is scheduled maintenance for the well. Typically occurs every 7 to 10 years. The well was last had work on it back in 2011, so we're about 8.5 years in. We did know that this maintenance was coming. It's scheduled maintenance, but we were, as Trustee Fink mentioned, hoping to have well number 5 online, but just due to the timing, the well number 5 project won't be online until later this year. As part of the memo that you guys have in your packet, there's some strategic considerations in terms of timing and cost that the board may wish to consider, and I'll kind of walk through that process here. And if you guys do have any questions, feel free to just jump in and let me know.
Director Super, could you please put
Oh,
the...
yeah, I'm sorry.
And I just wanted to also mention that Director Duffy wanted to be here. Unfortunately, she is ill, so therefore Director Super is in her stead.
So total project time we are looking at for approximately 6 to 8 weeks for the well maintenance, and that's kind of the typical maintenance process. Here you can see a breakdown of essentially the repair process. You would basically pull all the equipment. We do an inspection on all the equipment, service the motor, recondition the existing pipe, disassemble, repair the pump as necessary, and then mobilize and reassemble back on site. Part of the process that we would like to talk about a little bit this evening is related to specifically the pipe as well as the motor. There's some opportunity there if the board wishes to potentially speed up that process, but there may be an investment related to that if you wish to speed up the process. Before I jump into that, though, I'll give you a little bit of background on the performance evaluations we've been doing to monitor as part of our kind of preventative maintenance program, working with Suez throughout this year, and what that basically explains for the pump. This is the scheduled maintenance strategic considerations here, which I'll actually jump back to after I kind of walk through some of the performance evaluation. So, well number 4, the performance evaluation, we've been monitoring basically through the past year or so. What we take is basically the pump performance, and we've noticed that there's been a decrease in the pump performance over the past year. It remains well within the spec, the expectation of where its performance is, but it just is the indicator to let us know that performance is coming due, or maintenance is coming due for the well. Right now, as of June of this year, we've basically seen a decrease of 24% on the performance of the pump. Now, that doesn't mean that we're seeing 24% decrease in volume, but it's basically the pump is having to work harder to maintain the volume output that it's doing right now.
Is that, Matt, over the last year, or is that over in total, the 24%?
That's a 24% from its peak, yes. So that's
Not from 18.
It's not a 24% drop from 18 over the 18% previously. So there's a, in the other report from Suez that you have in your packet, there is a performance curve chart in there, which would kind of show where the expectation of where the pump should be based on its life cycle. I know one of the largest concerns, and we talked about this quite a bit at the Public Works and Water Committee, is system operations while we bring the pump down online. So we've looked at historically at our maintenance records and our output records through the water treatment plant. One of the reasons we schedule these preventative maintenance programs in the winter is because the system demand is the lowest it's going to be throughout the year. Most of the issues we've had with well number 3 over the past couple of years is it's gone down in very high demand periods throughout the year, typically in August and September. We anticipate that well number 3, which we just recently completed maintenance on, would be able to fully provide all the water we need to distribution while 4 is down for maintenance. So we would not anticipate the need to use any well number 1. That's, of course, the question that's probably on everybody's mind is, would we have to use the shallow well? We would only anticipate the need to shallow well if we had a catastrophic water main break or a structure fire within the community that would use an exorbitant amount of water that's unusual as part of the average day. But our average output is right around 1.5 million gallons per day throughout January and February, and our well number 3 can meet that demand through treatment, so there shouldn't be any major impacts or noticeable differences in water quality while we're doing maintenance on the well.
Director Super, real quick on water mains, can you just provide a little bit of information about just when and how those occur?
Sure, especially in the winter. So when you do experience water mains in the winter, it's not the cold typically in and of itself that causes water mains. It's typically fluctuations in temperature. So when you have periods from warm to cold, you have expansion and contraction that occur in the ground. And that's typically when you'll have water mains that'll settle and break. So, just going back to last winter when we had the polar vortex period, during those really, really cold days, we did have a couple, but we didn't have an exorbitant amount of water main breaks during that period. It was actually further towards the end of February into March when the temperature begins to change that we typically experience more of our water main breaks.
Okay, so we want today's temperatures just to stay steady then.
The more steady it is, the better.
Okay.
Now, the one thing we'll note in terms of operationally, if we do have some water main breaks while we're down during this maintenance period, typically, Public Works Department, we will try to minimize the water outage period for residents. So certain water main breaks, if they're not catastrophic or significant in terms of volume, we may let them continue to keep the main open so residents continue to have water because it takes a couple hours for Julie to come and they locate your underground utilities, and we're not allowed to dig and begin the repair until that's complete. When we're down for this maintenance, we will likely change our procedure slightly and do a shutdown of that main immediately, which may mean there may be periods where residents will experience a disruption in the water service, no water for several hours more than they typically would as we would treat, because we're trying to conserve water when we're in this maintenance period. This is just a chart you'll see in your graph that kind of shows the total output capacity of well number 3. What you see here on this table basically outlines the different operating scenarios in which we can bring well number 3 through the treatment plant. Our typical scenario is we would bring well number 3 through the treatment plant at 100%, which is 24 hours, which is the top cell on the left-hand most column, and it shows basically what our output capacity would be. It's about 1.4 million gallons per day. And then we can modify that operationally based on what our need is, based on what we're observing from system demand. You can see we can go up to 1.6 million gallons a day, and that's all without having to need to use well number 1. Well number 1, this is just a snapshot in terms of production to give you a what sort of volume it would be putting out if we needed to use it. Here you can see operationally, if we were running it between 2 and 10 hours a day, what the volume output and what sort of expected percent and distribution you would observe. Just as a note, when we did have the well number 3 issues earlier this summer, we had to run well number 1 about 18 hours a day in addition to running well number 4 24/7. And that gives you just an idea of how high the demand during the summer months really is, where you're running 2 wells almost at full capacity versus expectation of 1 well being able to meet system demand in the winter.
Director Supert, can you comment on the number of gallons that we use in the summer as opposed to the winter?
Yes. So it's almost about 60% more. So in the summer, we can reach as high as about 2.6 million gallons per day. In the winter, especially during these January and February months, that's where we'd be closer to that 1.5 million gallons per day range.
And well number 3 could supply
Correct.
that amount, correct?
Is there a risk with our putting off the maintenance of well number 4 till next year when well number 5 will be up? Or is that a potentially dangerous?
Yeah, so we did talk about that pretty significantly. It's our recommendation, and certainly coordinating with Suez, and we also talked to Baxter and Woodman about this. Really, the risk that you have there is that that well could have a problem, and it could occur during your high demand periods. We believe well number 5 will come on right around June, mid to end of June. If you have an issue occur where we delayed the preventative maintenance and an issue happens sometime in the spring, we would absolutely have to utilize the shallow emergency well, because any time beyond this winter period, we wouldn't be able to meet the system demand with a single well. And that's why we typically schedule these preventative maintenance programs to occur in the winter.
You've balanced it out and decided that the possibility of their going into well number 1 is offset greatly by this problem that could happen if we.
Yeah, and really, I think the thing we need to kind of highlight too is this is scheduled maintenance, so this is not a surprise. We were planning on doing this work in 2020. Coming off of this well number 3, which was a different issue this past year, I know there's a perception issue with that. That was an electrical failure that we had down in the bottom of the well. It's not related to the well number 4 maintenance we're doing here. And really, while we were hoping to have well number 5 online, that project, because of the IEPA funding timeline and time, as we kind of referenced earlier with Central Avenue project, whenever you're working with federal or state funds that are provided to you, when you get quote-unquote free money, time is always the trade-off typically with any sort of those projects. So well number 5 will not be online until about June, and that's why we are really recommending that we proceed with the preventative maintenance now rather than wait to an extended period.
Well, what convinced me to not just kind of cross our fingers and wait and prepare and get ready for it in case the well did shut down prematurely before we were able to get to scheduled maintenance was the fact that Aaron said that the reduced production from this well, from the pump, I think, is causing the pump at the water plant to work harder. Is that correct? And then it...
Yeah. There's actually a chart in here that Aaron put together. Not sure where it is. But it is in the memo as well where she's talking about negative pressure. And that comes back to that efficiency from the pump that I referenced to earlier. As the efficiency of the pump decreases, it's not pushing the water to the water treatment plant as effectively. And in the water treatment plant, we have pumps that shepherd the water through the plant, through the treatment process. Those pumps, in turn, have to work harder because they are also pulling the water from the well in addition to pushing it through the plants. So what she'll see and she'll observe through her equipment, through our SCADA system, is what we call negative pressure. Whereas you want the well to be pushing the water to the plant, and then those pumps pushing the water through the treatment plant.
Director Super, we
Yeah.
have Ahmad Hamdan tonight from Suez. I'd like to maybe have him come up and give his opinion on that. We asked that he be here. He's one of our experts that we utilize. He's from Suez. So if you can maybe come up and talk about the pressure and so forth and what you would recommend in this situation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys for having me here tonight. As Matt explained very well, typically over time, whenever we've installed these these bowl assemblies and motors submerged in the water wells, we see declines from just regular usage. As you saw, there was a decline from, over the past 7 years was 18%. Then we saw a rather substantial jump, about 6% in 1 year between 2018 and 2019. That is where that negative pressure is likely coming from. And as Matt pointed out, if you look at those curves in your guys' reports, it's performing below expected capacity. The blue lines are typically what we expect based on the design curve. We found the bowl assembly and we charted out exactly how it should be performing, and then we see how is it performing relative to that. So because it's performing less than typical capacity, it has to compensate by decreasing the output pressure to give the same amount of gallons per minute that you guys are demanding through your osmosis plant. And then the other thing that is also of concern is the mega ohm readings. And meg readings are essentially electrical continuity within the motor, and we like to trend those over time. Always a question is, what's a good number? There's no hard, fast answer, but the higher the better. For your guys' reference, once we serviced well number 3, the mega ohm readings was 4,000 mega ohms, and that's only because the meg reader doesn't read more than that. That means overload, which means we have total continuity within the motor. Over time, we see a decrease in mega ohm readings, and you don't want to get to a point where the motor is shorting itself, because then it's probably past repair. And you guys have motors that are very, very valuable assets that if you can service them, it's ideal. That way you're not replacing motors that have very long lead times. So between both the pump performance and the motor performance, that's what pushes us to say definitely do preventative maintenance on these assets, because they are very valuable assets to the village, and very expensive to replace if you guys don't service them in the proper interval. And as far as this motor in particular, I think it's been in service for quite a while, but it's because we've been constantly servicing it on the recommended intervals.
And that's your recommendation, even though we will be relying on just one deep well during that service period?
Regarding your guys' system demand, I can't speak to that, but I will say our experience with multiple municipalities is they like to take advantage of the winter time because there's less demand, especially with municipalities that do have not as much redundancy necessarily. It's definitely important they like to plan it during winter, because unfortunately emergencies like to pick the most inconvenient times. So that's what we've seen over time, and our team has seen over number of municipalities.
So we're looking at 6 months, or I'm sorry, 6 weeks to do this project?
So I think that would depend
about right?
on a few decisions made beforehand. There are some, and Matt can speak more to them if you'd like, there are some items that can be done preemptively to decrease that timeline and thus decrease the risk, if something catastrophic were to happen, you'd have well 4 back up and running.
So there's 2 strategic options that the board can consider that we talked about at both the Public Works and Water Committee as well as the Finance Committee. One thing you could do, and we're looking to probably reduce the overall maintenance time frame by possibly about 2 to 3 weeks if we explore both these options. Back in 2017, so the village in the past has always had a spare motor in storage, spare motor on well. When we had the well issues in 2017 with the electrical issue, we took our spare motor off the shelf and put that down into the well. So we currently don't have a spare motor on the shelf in standby. One item for consideration that I believe the Finance Committee will be discussing as well is we could repurchase in this timeframe leading up to this maintenance in the next couple months a new motor. Take the new motor, put that down into well number 4. The one that's going to come out would be reconditioned, and then that would become our spare motor, which would be kind of bring it back to our standard practice. That maintenance process there to recondition the motor, which would normally be coming out, would be approximately 2 weeks or so, depending on what sort of maintenance needs to be done. One item that we also talked about in consideration related to the motor, which is truly an unknown, and we wouldn't know this until the motor comes out of the hole, is the current motor from our Byron Jackson that we have in there is a Mercury Seal motor. Now, the Mercury Seals are very, very good motors, but regulations do not allow, if significant work has to be done on those, that they can go back into the hole. If you're doing kind of standard routine maintenance, an oil change, I'll say, in quotes, on that work, you can reuse it, but if there's any sort of significant rebuild required, you can't do that. In order then to rebuild it, convert it from a Mercury Seal to a double mechanical seal, that could be a 60-day process. And if we didn't have, or we don't have a spare motor on standby ready to go, that would be a 60-day delay time in the project. And as I mentioned, we wouldn't know until we actually pull the motor out to know what the condition is before we do that. So one of the strategic considerations we discussed is if we would like to buy a rebuilt Byron Jackson motor, reestablish our backup motor, as kind of has been our current policy in the past, then we would have that ready to go on standby prior to pulling the well. We could then put that, basically just assume to put that down back into the well. The one we pull out would be reconditioned, and we can recondition that at kind of our own process. And if it's just needs a standard reconditioning for 2 to 3 weeks, we would do that and then put that into storage, which we would utilize as our backup for 3 and 4 days, standard practice. The other item we can consider for the board would be to purchase new pipe. Pulling the pipe and then sandblasting, reconditioning, and recoating the pipe is a significant part of the time frame for the well maintenance. I believe that's approximately 2 to 3 weeks, that process. Yeah. So one thing we could do is pull the pipe, purchase new pipe, put the new pipe into the well, and then recondition that pipe that we pulled out and apply that to the new well 5 construction. That we've already coordinated with Baxter Woodman that pipe could be set for the well number 5 installation. The pipe that we have, about 500 feet of the 800 plus feet that's in the ground, is brand new pipe that we actually purchased in 2011. But these are all items that we could discuss or consider to shave off approximately 2 to 4 weeks from the overall project time.
You know, are those pumps universal? So if we have that spare pump, would that work for wells 3, 4, and 5, or would it just
They're
work
not
for that?
universal. So wells 3 and 4 currently have a Byron Jackson motor of the same type. It's a 400 horsepower, and it would be interchangeable between those 2 wells. Well number 5, we're actually pursuing a different motor type. We're looking to go with a Baker Hughes motor. There's some more flexibility with that motor and pump system, especially in the way it can integrate and communicate with the water treatment plant in a more smart fashion. So it wouldn't be applicable to that one, but it would be interchangeable as a backup to 3 and 4.
Director Super, if we said we think it's prudent to get this new pump and also prudent to pull these pipes, then what would the time frame be that we're going to be just on well 3?
So we'd be looking probably around 3 to 4 weeks for that maintenance turnaround, as opposed to the 6 to 8 weeks. Again, we don't know, we can't promise a specific timeline until we can pull the equipment, but we were looking to shave off probably 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, if we have those equipment on standby. A lot of that kind of depends on the condition of the equipment that we pull once we pull it out.
So about half the time, though.
Approximately.
Significant.
In addition, if we find out that there is a problem with the motor, then that would take about 60 days or so to...
That's if we had to convert it
Yes.
from a Mercury seal to a double mechanical seal process.
True. Bill?
Colleagues, as a member of the Public Works and Water Committee, I can attest to the thoughtful deliberation and logical recommendation presented by staff to us at committee meetings. I believe this is the most prudent direction to take, as recommended by our chair.
Great.
I was just gonna ask, you said that we used to have a motor that was on the shelf. Is that motor no longer, or that pump?
So, yeah, great question.
I
So,
missed that part. You may have said it,
yeah,
but I feel
so
like I
back in
missed it.
2017,
Yeah.
we had the major electrical failure.
Yeah.
It actually occurred at the surface, not down in the well.
Okay.
But we had some issues that kind of radiated down. So we pulled the motor that we had on the shelf and put that down in the 3 during that 2017 accident
Okay.
issue. And we had, the one that we pulled out had some damage on it. Now, that is still sitting in a shop with Lane Christensen, who was the firm who did the repair at that time. That one, based on our conversations with them, we wouldn't recommend rebuilding at this point. Now, we can get some trade-in value for that, and then that could be applied towards essentially the cost for another rebuilt motor, which we would likely be purchasing for this project.
I see. So that motor is not, still needs some work, and it's not clear that it can be rehabilitated?
Right, there's
Okay.
potentially some significant work on it where the
Okay.
funds may be better invested in an already rebuilt motor.
How
Okay.
expensive are these pumps?
So the motor is approximately $99,000. It's on the last page in the memo. So it's $99,700 for the rebuilt Byron Jackson motor. And then we would potentially get some credit off of that when we do trade in the other motor that's in Lane Christensen. We're anticipating maybe approximately $15,000 to $20,000 for the trade-in off of that previous motor. And then the well pipe would be $52,000 for the purchase of the new well pipe. And again, there's potentially some cost savings related to that that could be offset based on the amount of cleaning and maintenance that may need to occur on the pipe that comes out of the ground. So there's in the memo, there's the cleaning line items for the pipe as well as the epoxy coating and the rethreading. This is a conservative estimate we have in there. If that item is less, some of that kind of credit would get applied to the purchase of new pipe. And then, as I mentioned, this pipe that we would pull out, it is still new. It's 2011. We would apply that to the new well as well. So it's not a lost cost per se. It's just we would be making that purchase either way because we still have to buy pipe for the well that's being constructed as well.
Yeah, I agree with the committee. I think it's prudent, especially since we can use these in the new well too, so it's not as if we are just wasting material we already have.
I agree. We've had a history of some bad things happening with water here. We should take as much responsibility as we can to minimize the risk of something, water main breaking on and
Right.
having to go to number 1 in the middle of the winter.
I think the less time we have that well offline, the better. So the things we can do to prepare for that is money well spent. So, I think.
I think it is, unfortunate, the timing with well number 5 and just our kind of unfortunate lag time in between. That said, I agree, and I think the preparations and the deliberate thought that's gone into it it's very, very thorough, and I'm persuaded that it's the right approach. But I agree that the timing is a little
Right.
rough that I wish we didn't have. But I appreciate the analysis and understanding that winter, I really appreciate the thorough explanation of why winter is so much better. It makes sense, but I wouldn't have thought of it unless you'd explained it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions of Ahmad or Director Super?
When do we move this for board action?
So I
Tonight?
believe in the Finance
Tonight?
Committee.
Okay.
For the
Okay. So, yeah, as part of the special meeting, as part of the
Okay.
Finance Committee report, there's for consideration the Byron Jackson motor purchase and then the well pipe. And then, as part of the standard process, the next meeting next month is the proposal from Suez to conduct the maintenance. So we would approve that contract at the second meeting. But the special meeting process is to, if the board approves, to get the motor and the pipe purchase rolling.
And the maintenance and the costs associated with maintenance are things that we would plan. It's just the timing of when we're going to make those expenditures, right?
Correct, yes. So we were anticipating the approximately $160,000, $170,000 for the maintenance to occur in 2020.
Right.
It was really just as it relates in time in relation to the well number 5 completion.
Yep, understood.
But that was in the budget for next
Yep.
year.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's in next year's budget.
Yep, so we were anticipating this maintenance
Yes.
to occur.
Correct.
It's just our timing is.
So because we'll be voting on this later tonight, is there any other discussion before we move on with your report, Trustee Fink? Anybody else have any comments or questions or concerns? Okay, please, go
All
ahead.
right.
Thank you for the reports.
My last thing is more of a bookkeeping thing. I would like to waive the construction hours for the road resurfacing and well 5 transmission main. Actually, it happened already, Saturday, November 9th, 2019.
Okay, did that happen though?
No, it
Yeah.
No, actually, they didn't, they weren't out there doing the work. We are coordinating with them. We're anticipating weather to improve later this week into next week.
Okay.
We'll coordinate with Manager Belkney if they do request again, maybe a Saturday work to complete the work, since we're getting kind of late in the year and potential construction days or windows are getting tight. They may request a Saturday if they need it. But weather is supposed to get warmer, I believe, towards the end of the week and into next week.
And the reason why they weren't out there is
Yeah.
because the asphalt plants were not open. They told them that they would not be open
Oh.
because of the cold weather.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's unfortunate because it's, a main road and, yeah.
Correct.
And I'm always looping around because I keep forgetting it's closed.
Yeah, so
Asphalt
what's,
plant's gonna reopen?
Hillgrove.
Or they
Hillgrove.
closed?
right, so
Yeah.
what's the timing then of the
We
road?
do hope that
Next
they
week.
open up at the end of the week when it gets warmer, so.
Can we make a provisional authorization for that?
You do have a motion on the omnibus. Why don't we just change that to, instead of last Saturday, to have them, authorized to work, maybe any Saturday, through the end of the construction year,
Yeah.
weather
Great.
dependent,
In order to complete the
in
work,
order to
yes.
complete the project.
Good, let's do that.
And just as a
point,
clarification
Bill.
point, they were out there on Hillgrove pouring concrete. So that work actually did occur on Saturday.
Oh, okay.
We're waiting for that to cure, and it should reopen the next day or so. The other work was the asphalt work for the MFT motor fuel tax projects that we have scattered throughout
I see.
town. So those streets are still drivable right now, but we're looking to get the binder course and the asphalt poured on those.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay,
That is
anything-
all I have.
Okay, thank you very much, Trustee Fink. Moving on to Finance Committee, Planning and Zoning, Trustee John,
I'm
sorry.
quick. No problem. Thank you. So part of the Planning and Zoning Committee, I want to give a quick update on the community development budget for 2020. So the community development provides a variety of services, including zoning, building permits and inspections, property maintenance, enforcement, and economic development. The department consists of 4 full-time employees and is supplemented by consultants for specific services for residents, businesses, and other customers. The department budget for 2020 will remain relatively unchanged. Annual expenditures of approximately $753,000 are mostly tied to salary, benefits, and consultant services. The department does not have a significant capital expenditures. The revenues generated through permits and fees. The 2 of the largest funds are dedicated to professional services, e.g. stormwater, complaints, building inspections, property maintenance, etc. And plan review, which is architectural, engineering, and forestry for new homes. The volume of construction in the village is expected to remain constant through 2020. This is due to the fact that investment and reinvestment in existing homes and businesses will continue as long as the economy stays strong. The Planning and Zoning Committee reviewed the proposed budget on October 21st, and there are no objections, and the committee approved the budget. So just wanted to give an update on the Community Development Department, and that is it. Any questions?
Thank you, Trustee John. Moving now to Finance Committee, Trustee Rudolph.
Thank you, President Gallagher. Several items to bring to everyone's attention tonight, items that'll be on the omnibus. First, the proposed tax levy, the 2019 levy. The limitation law specifies that our property tax increases, the levies are to be the lesser of 5% or the increase in the consumer price index, plus an additional amount for new growth.
We are projecting, we are recommending a 4.31% of the capped portion, and then our non-capped portion will increase by 19.6% due to the 2019 referendum, our general obligation bond that was issued in September of this year. So in total, the proposed levy includes an increase of about 7.35%. In addition to that levy, the Thomas Ford Library levy is also included, and theirs is approximately 2.36%. The only thing that could change is if the county comes back to us and our numbers for new growth are off. But otherwise, this is our proposed levy for 2019 that the Finance Committee then is recommending be on the omnibus. So questions about that? Okay. If not, we have several budget transfers that will also include on the omnibus. The first is regarding the well number 3 and the final costs. We did, I think, have a correction to one of the invoices I think that we had looked at a prior meeting. The final cost for the rehabilitation of well number 3 will have a budget amendment in the amount of $142,024. The next one is for the roadway referendum fund for the 28 construction costs associated for the Johnson and lawn work discussed previously tonight of $28,221 roughly. Next, budget amendment for legal costs associated with the TIF. So that is a budget amendment request from Director Turi for $4,000 for that legal work. The next one is from Chief Buds and was previously discussed but left off a prior omnibus for additional holiday pay for upcoming assignments in total of $15,000 for that budget amendment request. Next, also from Director Turi, and this is part of a normal review of accounts, but we've reviewed the general fund. That has been completed. And according to our reserve requirement, our general fund reserve requirement, the village maintains a committed fund balance to fund operations for a period of at least 4 months or 30%. So that's what we keep in reserve. Based upon our fiscal 2019 general fund revised budget expenditures, we do have access available to transfer to our special purpose reserve fund. So the Finance Committee agrees with that and recommends moving $400,000 to the special purpose reserve fund. So that would be another budget amendment on the omnibus. And then the last one is, as we just discussed, the Director Super covered the costs associated with accelerating the maintenance on well number 4. They are requesting a budget amendment of $172,140, which is the $99,000 for the motor and other associated costs with that. So, I'm sorry?
Pipe.
The pipe, sorry, thank you, and the pipe. So those are the budget amendments that will
That's
be on.
just being moved into this year,
Moved
whereas
into
you've
this
already
year.
got budget, and that's on tonight's omnibus, I see it, I read that here, but these
Correct.
others, are they gonna be later?
The others are going to be on the omnibus
December?
in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. All right. Moving on. The next item for your information is disposal of surplus property. It's just notification of the disposal of a Fire King 4-drawer safe, which was sizable and heavy, and replaced with a smaller model. And we sold the big heavy one for $76, and it was removed. So it seems like the removal was probably worth it. Next, we have an update to the vehicle license code, to the amendment, the penalty associated with that. We have a draft ordinance really to strengthen the fine for the non-compliance with the vehicle stickers. The current penalty is a graduated fee that increases to $35 by July 1st, which essentially ends up then with a total cost of $85. Most residents comply with the deadline. It's really not a problem, but the proposed change increases the penalty to $50 on May 1st, so effectively doubling the cost to $100 right after the due date. The reason for this too is really we spend a disproportionate amount of time chasing down those where they're not in compliance versus all of the residents who are in compliance. So the Finance Committee has reviewed this and agrees with that recommendation to adopt that change. Questions or discussion about that? Okay.
Next item, moving right along, is my call for a BOLI meeting, which will be at our December 16th meeting. Is that the right date? December 16th. Okay, that's right, because we're off schedule for that.
Right.
Next, just for information purposes, the Police Pension Board met on November 5th, and per usual, they reviewed the fund and the fund performance. In addition to that, with the help of our actuary and the fund manager, discussed the prospect and the implications of changing the average rate of return, the average interest rate of return on the funds. So you may wonder why this is important. If we would change that assumption, it would change what the village then contributes to the pension fund. So it's a fairly significant change if the current assumption is 6.75%. The average rate of return, we follow this, I report on the return every month. It's pretty hard to predict that we're going to continue at or above that level. I mean, if anybody has a crystal ball on this, great, but a lot of other pension funds are looking at their average rate of return and are lowering theirs from anywhere from 6.25 to 7%, depending on their assumptions and their particular circumstances. The pension board decided to take this under consideration. They're going to be looking at the returns over the next few months, and the next meeting will be in January, where they will probably make a decision at that point, at which time, if they do, that gives the instruction to our actuary to recalculate it, and then we would act on it in our 2021 budget. So that would be the impact to us, we would be looking at an increased contribution in 2021. And there would be recommendations, again, from our outside advisors in terms of how we took that on, in terms of how we could smooth that increase to minimize the overall impact. Questions about this?
Yeah, so I know there's a bill in Springfield where they're consolidating
Yes.
police and fire. Will that have some impact on the fees? So hopefully that would cause us to, I don't know, have us some savings on the fee.
So that's a great question,
Right.
and that was discussed at length as well. And there are a lot of unknowns about that right now.
Yeah, sure.
And our fees right now are not significant. Is that correct? Yeah. So we wouldn't necessarily see a big savings in that. There are really too many unknowns to offer whether or not would be advantageous to us. I think there's even as we learned and discussed during the meeting, there's a lot of misinformation right now about what it could mean.
Yes.
We are not, a village like ours would not be making up for somebody else's. So that's part of kind of a misconception, which was discussed.
Yeah. Okay, so the benefits for that consolidation may not be something realized.
But there could be some benefits to it. I mean, Director Turi, do you want to add anything more? I'm probably not doing it justice in terms
No,
of
you're
all.
doing a fine job. The consolidation issue is not so much that we would be diminishing our contribution, because our contribution remains based on our demographics. What the consolidation would do is obviously give economies of scale for the investment side of it, so
Right.
there would be savings there. But I think by the time those savings trickle through the system, it could be a lengthy procedure. So we would continue funding at a level that is advantageous to the fund.
Of course. Well, then maybe there's a possibility someday in the future, if it happens, that there would be some nominal savings.
Benefit,
yeah. Okay.
It's obviously we're keeping a close eye on that. It's of great importance and interest to the pension board. So, yeah, thank you. Question. Okay, and last, just an update on the Ridgewood Oaks Special Service Area, that we have concluded the terms of that SSA, and they will be 10 years at 3.5%. If you remember from some of our prior discussions and some of the residents here that are participating in that, we did conclude that 10 years would be a reasonable term for that. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, can you, what is that special assessment for again?
So the Ridgewood Oaks, the basin,
Retention.
the retention
Water
basin
retention.
there.
that exists.
Detention.
There is a difference.
Yeah, this has been going on for years, and
2016.
2016, yeah. Matt, do you want
Yeah,
to?
I'll give you the
Well,
quick
I mean, I
summary.
don't need a full, but does it already, is it something that's being proposed, or is this?
So we've been working with the HOA to reestablish the detention basin that they own.
Oh, reestablish
Um,
it, okay.
Yes, it's already been permitted. It's been in place since the early 70s, I believe, when it was
Okay.
permitted. We found it was out of compliance as part of our Ridgewood overall stormwater investigations from several years ago. So as part of that process, we've been working with them to reestablish it. Now, the project is beyond a project they'd be able to handle, so the village has offered to kind of shepherd them through that project for redesigning it and bringing it back up to speed. This special service area is kind of a way for the village to essentially front the funds, coordinate the construction, and then the residents would pay the village back.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Thank you.
And I have nothing further.
If
Thank
I-
you.
If I may,
Oh, sorry.
I just want to let the board know, and President Gallagher, that we did distribute at your dais the 2020 draft budget for your review. That budget is also on display at the library and as well as the front desk. It is a draft. We're still working on it to refine it, but it's a launching point. If there's any specific questions, please feel free to contact us. We would be glad to elaborate. And then the final draft budget will be presented at the December 2nd meeting as part of the hearing process, and that's when, and then you'll be voting on it on December 16th.
Thank you. And thank you, Trustee Rudolph. Moving on to Public Health and Safety Committee, Trustee Sifferman.
Madam President, there are several items that come to this body out of the November 7th and 11th Public Health and Safety Committee meetings. Backup materials for these discussion items are contained in your packets. I will be adjusting the listed order of my presentation of these items, beginning with item A, self-contained breathing apparatus is one of the most important pieces of equipment our firefighters must have to allow them to perform life-saving duties. When you can't breathe, nothing else matters. In 2015, the department acknowledged that the village would be mandated to replace the existing units by 2020 at an estimated cost of $200,000. Recognizing the fiscal impact this expenditure would have upon the village's capital budget, the department initiated application for grant funds from the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program as both an individual agency and as part of a collaborative with neighboring communities. These most recent grant applications for $230,000 were rejected a month ago. Chief Kenny had already commissioned a committee chaired by Lieutenant Carl Hammond to evaluate the breathing apparatus manufactured by two top companies, Air One and Municipal Emergency Services. Lieutenant Hammond's approach to this assignment was all-inclusive, thorough, and most comprehensive. His detailed report contained in your materials chronicles his evaluative process, utilizing simulated emergency situations. His findings and recommendations are included in that report. He involved the entire department in his analysis and deliberation. This professionally prepared document identified Air One as the most appropriate vendor for the village to initiate its first purchase of $120,945 from our $121.5 thousand fiscal year 2019 capital budgeted amount. So this expenditure is less than what we had already budgeted in our 2019 capital budget. The committee approved this expenditure and wishes to advance this item to the next omnibus bill for adoption.
Thank you. We'll put it on the omnibus.
Item B, Chief Kelly informed the committee of his appreciation and confidence in the fire service leadership development and decision-making program administered through the University of Illinois for the 3 standard fire service levels within the Western Springs Fire Department that 9 of our current and potential officers have already participated in. The 40-hour week-long curriculum offered in Champaign has been modified into 4 8-hour modules offered locally for the benefit of our paid-on-call staff at a reduced cost to the village. The curriculum that utilizes the Socratic method of teaching addresses important facets of fire service leadership, is nationally recognized as a model fire service leadership development program. The department is proud of this program and the alumni as reflected in Lieutenant Hammond's recent report, a recent graduate of that program. And the department anticipates continuing participation occasioned by future promotions and hires. Item C, Chief Kelly reminded the committee of the village's membership and participation in Cook County's Hazard Mitigation Plan initiated in 2014 and needs our support to adopt a resolution renewing our support of this plan every 5 years. Enclosed in your packets is an executive summary of the Cook County Plan and a draft resolution that the committee recommends be added to the next omnibus bill for adoption. Once passed, Director Supert will notify Cook County of our renewed participation through 2023. Moving to item F, Chief Buds reports the upcoming retirement of Police Sergeant Joseph Rourke after providing nearly 3 decades of service to the residents of Western Springs. Formal recognition of his service and the occasion of his retirement is scheduled for November 25th Village Board meeting, preceded by a village staff recognition event scheduled for November 21st at 10 a.m. in the all-purpose room. Our grateful appreciation and congratulations extend to Sergeant Rourke.
Well said.
Item G, under Other. Chief Buds will be hosting another Chat with the Chief event on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, November 13th at BB's Donuts from 10 a.m. to noon. This is a great opportunity for members of the community to engage Chief Buds in a conversation about public safety issues affecting your neighborhoods and our community. Further details can be found in the Tower Topics and the village website. Item E, enforcement issues related to the new cannabis acts. During our 11/7/19 Public Health and Safety Committee meeting, we discussed a variety of law enforcement issues that will be impacted by the January 2020 changes in state law authorizing the recreational use of cannabis by persons over the age of 21. We discussed the real prospect of increased service calls for police involvement coming in the wake of the new law, and particularly the lack of field testing detection technology at the police officer's disposal in traffic enforcement scenarios. The prospect of increased underage recreational use, airborne nuisance complaints, aiding and abetting actions taken by adults, illicit medical authorizations were also considered as potential increases to police officers' workloads. The department is vigilant in its ongoing analysis and potential modification of existing police standard operating procedures that will ensure the public's safety. Item D, consideration of code and policy updates for the village to comply with the new Illinois cannabis laws. This item was addressed and considered at our posted Public Health and Safety Committee meeting conducted in the all-purpose room here at Village Hall earlier this evening. As discussed in previous village board meetings, it is incumbent upon our body to address these two matters in short order and in a way that protects the welfare of our residents by taking those necessary measures to temporarily prohibit adult use cannabis business establishments within the village until such time as an advisory referendum is administered. The committee is advancing for consideration and adoption at the omnibus bill, a moratorium ordinance prohibiting the use of adult cannabis business establishments in Western Springs, following a public meeting to address this issue, a public meeting that would be scheduled at our November 25th meeting. We will do this until such time as the results of an advisory referendum scheduled for November 2020 provides us with further direction to take following the conclusion of this moratorium. Any addition that you would like to make, Attorney Jerusek?
No, that summarizes it.
Can you just go back over the process timeline? So 11/25 is,
11/25, and materials that were distributed by Attorney Jerusek has a timeline for all the different actions and steps that need to be taken. So before we vote on this, we are obligated to conduct a public hearing on this issue, and that will be calendared and scheduled and posted in advance of our meeting on November 25th.
okay, and then the advisory referendum, so that you're.
That will be scheduled for November 2020 general election, but there are steps to take where the committee will craft specific language that will be included in the referendum.
We can go up to 3 advisory referendum questions, so the committee and the whole board will probably in May, June of next year, vet those potential questions. We'll have to adopt those, 1 to 3 advisory referendum questions sometime in June, July. By the end of July, we have to file that resolution that identifies up to 3 advisory questions with the Cook County Clerk's Office, the Election Department, to get it on the November 2020 ballot. So this month, you're going to have a public hearing, the next board meeting. If you follow the committee's recommendation, after that public hearing on the 25th of November, you'll pass a moratorium ordinance. That moratorium ordinance will be in effect for calendar year 2020. And then later in the spring, early summer, you'll revisit the issue, or at any time. But you'll come up with up to three advisory referendum questions. You'll approve those by resolution at a public board meeting sometime June, July. We'll do the filing with the clerk in late July, and then your referendum in November will essentially be a community survey, taking the pulse. You will bring that information back in November, December, and then the board will have to make a decision as to what it decides to do with recreational cannabis businesses. Do you want to opt out and not allow them? Do you want to allow them in the community? That decision will be made, by the board in, November, December. The moratorium itself will automatically expire at the end of December 2020, so you should be ready to take some type of action after the November referendum, results come back in November, December of next year to kind of finalize this issue.
So with the January 1st legalization, what is before us is we have to either opt out or opt in or have a moratorium, right? I mean, those are our choices prior to January 1st. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just making sure I understand the big picture here of what's required of us with it becoming legal as of January 1st.
Once again,
If you do nothing, then those type of establishments could just, come to the
Sure.
community and open up under the regular business and zoning regulation laws.
Right.
Are the
But this-
moratoriums required?
No, it's not required, but it's one way to.
I'm sorry, the referendums, are those required?
No, those are advisory referendum in order for the board to gather information as to, what
Pulse of the
policy
village.
decision, what policy decision to make.
So we're gonna have a temporary opt-out for the next year, and then there'll be in the general election, it'll be put to the citizens of the town, and after that, we'll have to act on it with within that next month.
Yeah, it won't be a temporary opt-out, it'll be a temporary moratorium that will prevent those types of establishments from opening.
So this just addresses, once again, the moratorium on the establishments, not on whether or not the law is going to be followed.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And have we, so up at this upcoming meeting, it'll be one of the first, well, I know we've had a presentation, had lots of information about it, but in truly kind of looking at the pros and cons of it, this is where we're gonna have more opportunity to be discussing that, as well as then putting it to the citizens in the referendum for their, in the advisory referendum, for their opinion as to the pros and
Well,
cons.
my understanding is the public hearing is for going into the moratorium,
Correct.
not really
Okay.
on the substance of.
Okay. Okay,
Yes, the public hearing, you have to do a public hearing on a moratorium ordinance before you put basically a temporary freeze on your zoning
Okay.
in business, approvals. And so that public hearing on November 25th is only for you to discuss the merits of
I see.
imposing a moratorium for a 12-month period while you discuss and
Okay.
study the policy issue
okay,
of
thank you.
cannabis.
Okay, thank you.
But tonight, excuse me, tonight, I'd kind of like to get just a consensus vote on whether you're comfortable with this recommendation from the committee and this course of action,
The moratorium.
the moratorium. Going the moratorium route as opposed to opting out
We'd opt out after the referendum.
after the
Officially
referendum.
opt
We
out.
would do the moratorium. The reason it appeals to me is because this legislation was pushed through Springfield so quickly. There's a lot of unknowns with it. This gives us a chance to kind of see how it all falls out before we act. It's pausing where Springfield, I feel, didn't really pause too much, so.
I, for one, would have no objection at all to us having a moratorium for 12 months
Okay,
Yeah, I
until the
agree.
referendum.
okay. Okay,
I agree, and I would like to hear, pros and cons. I'm
sure,
thinking of sales tax revenue as
right.
an example. Just,
Right.
I would like to
finance
just talk
person,
through.
We should talk it through, but this will give us an opportunity to thoroughly vet it and,
Yep.
yeah, before we.
And I think an opportunity to see what other
Right.
villages and towns experience too.
True, and also to, to really get to capture as many of our residents as possible, to capture their opinion. I think that because it'll be at the general election in November, we'll get as big a turnout as we ever would. So
Yeah.
that's appealing.
Would we have scheduled public hearings about that after, while the moratorium's in place, after that to discuss this? Have the villagers come to give pros and cons?
Mike?
After the November referendum, questions are answered, the moratorium ordinance says staff will bring those results back with, enforcement recommendations and all, depending on which policy decision, whether you decide to opt in or opt out with the recreational cannabis
So it's
businesses.
likely those will go before the Public Health and Safety Committee.
I would think they would go right back through the same committee process and come back to the board in late November, and December for more vetting at this level.
Okay.
Okay, so then we'll put that on, we'll put that on the omnibus
Right.
next week, next 2 weeks. There.
Smart
got it.
reordering.
Can I ask a question to Trustee Zifferman or to Attorney
Sure.
Drusik? Were we supposed to do something regarding medicinal or medical marijuana, since we can't opt out of that? Do we have to do an ordinance related to
We
that?
cannot opt out of that.
Right, so I thought we had to draft ordinances related to that.
And we do, with the materials I handed out
Okay.
earlier today, take care of a zoning code amendment to deal with the medical cannabis business establishments.
Okay,
That has to go to a public hearing before the Plan Commission, so we're gonna schedule that public hearing
okay,
in
so that's
December
right,
or
I did read
January.
that, okay.
And so that will deal with those types of
Okay,
businesses.
so we don't have to have that in place before January 1st.
Ideally, but again, there's a
Okay.
state licensing process.
I see.
And if any businesses that do have medical cannabis license look at us, they're gonna see us going through a zoning process. they will realize that we are putting in
Okay.
place
Right.
a structure, and they will
Okay.
come and follow that.
That's right, it was in the packet, so, thank you.
This concludes my report.
Thank you, trustee Sifferman, and thank you to you and your committee member, Fink, for your extra attention to this important, unusual issue. Moving on to the General Government Committee, trustee Terrell.
Thank you, President Gadler. I will be brief. I have 3 housekeeping matters. First, the West Cook County Solid Waste Agency. It's a group of western Cook County suburbs, of which we are one. They have banded together in an effort to control the cost of disposal of municipal solid waste, including recycling efforts. The association also acts as a check on environmental liability for the management of waste streams. We have to have appoint a board member to this agency, and there also has to be 4 alternates. The board member will be our village president, and the 4 alternates will be, tell you, Heidi, Bill, myself, and Ingrid will be the 4 alternates in the event that our president is not able to fulfill her duties during any of the called upon for this agency. Secondly, moving to the refuse and recycling code changes. This is also some housekeeping. As we all know, we are moving to the carts. There will be no more blue bags. The code has to have some amendments to it to be put into conjunction with the new contract, the 5-year contract we're having with Lakeshore Recycling. The code will be amended to account for our cart-based refuse collection system. We're swapping out garbage bins for the carts, whether 95, 65, or 35 gallons. As we know, backdoor service will remain available. The pay-per-bag collection program is only available, as it stands now, to residents who have the monthly subscription service with the residential service contractor, and that also applies for yard waste. The stickers, putting that on your yard waste, if you're not going to use the bins, you still have to belong to have a contract with the Lakeshore Management. There's no opt-out presently at this point. Finally, moving to the personnel budget for 2020. Blue Cross and Blue Shield rates were very favorable. There's an overall increase of 3.5%. The Delta Dental and Standard Life Insurance renewals were flat. Regarding staffing, we are going to have reduced hours assigned to the part-time administrative assistant. That individual will change from 0.8 to 0.5 of full-time employment. We are adding a part-time graduate intern to the Municipal Services Department. In addition to the staffing plan, the village employs 50 paid on-call fire personnel and 150 seasonal part-time employees in the recreation and other departments. There will be an average salary increase of 2.5% included. It's included in the 2020 budget. The overall budget for full-time salaries is $5,122,590. Finally, the village is currently, as we know, in labor negotiations with Teamsters 700 for the 8 public works maintenance journeymen that is ongoing. There are no confirmed retirements for 2020 at this time, although that situation can change during the year. Other than that, that's all I would have, President.
Thank you, trustee Terrell. We have a public hearing scheduled under other business tonight, so I hereby call to order the public hearing relative to the proposed downtown north tax increment financing district. We have an overviews to be presented. Attorney Jerusik.
I'm going to turn over to Mike Huffman of Teskin Associate, our TIF consultant, who's going to run us through the PowerPoint he presented to us last month, just to revisit the issue
Okay.
for the public who may be seeing it for the first time.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you,
Nice to
President
see you
Gallagher.
again.
Good to be back. So, let me hit some of the highlights of this proposed tax increment financing district, which would be essentially where we are today and then the area along the north side of the railroad tracks. First of all, if you're not familiar with tax increment financing, it is a tool to kind of partner with the private sector to promote redevelopment, and it's a tool that the village can use to help improve the infrastructure in the area. So there's a lot of misperceptions about what tax increment financing is. It is not a new tax. what we're doing is we're harnessing the additional property tax revenue that would be created by redevelopment in the area or just kind of natural property increases in the area, and using those monies to improve and enhance the area. So it's not a new tax, it's just really a redistribution of the tax revenue. But it is not just the village portion of the tax revenue, it's all the taxing body's portion of the tax revenue. So from a timeline and perspective of how this actually works, right now what's happening is you've got a based value of property that's out there right now, and that's taxed by all the taxing districts that are the school district and the park district and the village and the county and et cetera, et cetera. They all tax the property that's out there. That will continue through the life of the tax increment district, but that we're establishing a base value of what it is out there today right now. So they'll continue to receive revenue for the next 23 years based upon that existing revenue stream and source. Then as redevelopment happens in the area and property values increase, we're going to harness that additional increase times the tax rate, and that money would go into a separate TIF fund that could be used for improvements in the area. And then once the TIF is closed out, assumably after 23 years, that increased value would then be going and benefiting all the different taxing bodies. So it's a way to kind of harness future tax revenue to improve an area. What you see there on the map is the area in brown is what we're talking about, and essentially the north side of the railroad tracks, but including the railroad tracks as well. What you see in there in blue is the existing TIF that was put in place a few years back. The Foxford development is in that area, and really the area south of the railroad tracks. A little bit smaller than the area we're talking about now. We're talking about an area here that is 49 acres, but almost half of that is in right between roads and railroads. So that's important to note. The other thing that's really important to note, the way we've structured this, is that those two tax increment financing districts would be contiguous to each other. So we would have the ability to share money from one district to another across that line, essentially the way we're establishing this. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility in administering the funds that might be available to you as time goes on in this TIF district. The goal is essentially to implement the downtown plan that was done a number of years ago, to seek revitalization in the area, work with property owners to enhance their properties, seek redevelopment opportunities, and very importantly, improve the infrastructure that's out there. A lot of the pipes and the water and sewer lines and that kind of stuff that are on the ground are very old on this part of the community. And so this would give us funding opportunity to improve those things, as well as some of the streetscape things that you've been talking about as a community. So that's kind of some of the goals that are proposed in the plan. To create a TIF district, we have to do an eligibility study to look at the conditions in the area, compare those to the requirements in state statute, and see whether we meet those criteria or not. There are essentially two different types of TIF districts you can create: a blighted area or a conservation area. As the names kind of imply, blighted is worse than conservation. Conservation is essentially saying, if we don't take some action and do some things, we might become blighted in the future. So it's kind of a preemptive move, if you will. And we are proposing to qualify this under the conservation area standards in the state statute. To do that, we have to have over 50% of the property or the structures that are out there 35 years or older, far exceed that requirement. So we certainly meet that requirement, and then we need another 3 criteria out of the 13 that are in the statute. What we found was we met 4 of those standards. So we have buildings and site improvements in that area that are deteriorated. That might be, in a lot of cases, the site improvements is parking lots that are in bad shape. We looked at the buildings and the character of those, and there's some deterioration on some of the structures out there. So in all, 49% of the buildings had some evidence of deterioration on them, and 67% of the sites had some deterioration of the surface improvements. So those are pretty significant numbers, and we feel very confident meet the requirement in statute to use that as a qualifying factor. Obsolescence, that can be either economic or functional. Given the age of these structures, it's very common to have obsolete structures in terms of modern uses and the types of space that a modern business might be looking for. So we feel that it met that criteria. Inadequate utilities, as we talked about, a lot of the infrastructure out there is quite old. We have combined sewers in some areas and pipes that are over 50 years old in place right there. So improving those and enhancing those would be a goal of the TIF, and that certainly is a qualifying factor with the TIF. And then lack of community planning. That is essentially saying, when most of this area developed, we didn't have a community comprehensive plan in place or a long-term vision for the community. We certainly do now, but when the area developed, we didn't, and that's why that factor. comes into play. So we needed at least 3 of these. We're very confident we've got 4. And there's actually a couple of other criteria that we met in some areas. But one of the requirements of the TIF statute is that these factors are prevalent throughout the area. So, for example, we had some areas and some buildings that did have some code violations and some of those issues in them, but it wasn't evenly spread out through the whole area. So we didn't use that as a qualifying factor, even though they are present in the area. And those are things that we might fund through the TIF to help improve in the future, but we didn't use those as qualifying factors. But we're very confident that the area does qualify. In terms of numbers, right now the equalized assessed value out in this area is just shy of $10 million. If all the projects and the redevelopment would happen as we've outlined it in the plan over the next 23 years, we would increase that value to about $32 million. So a very significant increase, over 3 times as much. Can't guarantee that that's going to happen that much, but that's what the projections, if all these projects were to happen. The document does talk about specific redevelopment sites in this area. Again, it's not to say that any of them specifically have to happen. It will be up to the property owners and working with the village to see some of those things happen. But when we did the redevelopment plan for the downtown area, we identified a number of redevelopment sites. Those are kind of carried forward here. So you see them in color on the map here. These are sites that we think are significantly underutilized today. So there may be some active use on the property today. It may actually be vacant in a couple of cases. But those are the key sites that we thought made the most sense to consider for redevelopment. And those are the sites that, when we did our projections of future revenue, those are the sites that are producing significant revenue. Essentially, to get a good increase in increment, what you need to do is really redevelop properties. So like the Foxford project, we'll eventually getting significant increase off of that because it's reconstructed new development. If somebody comes in and just does a facade rehab on a commercial building, that probably won't produce significant incremental revenue for you. It's still a good thing to do, still a good thing to help support, but it wouldn't create significant revenue. So those are the sites that we would think would be producing the most significant revenue. This is just a map of the existing downtown plan that we based a lot of the projections off of. What can we use TIF money for? Public infrastructure, first and foremost. That's a significant thing and a big piece of what we're talking about doing. If there was a need for environmental cleanup, we can certainly do those kind of things. Facade improvements, rehabilitation of existing structures, we can certainly do with TIF funds. We can assemble property, so if there's a need to assemble 3 parcels of land, say, together to create a larger redevelopment site, we can certainly do that with TIF funding. We cannot pay for new private construction. Having said that, we could fund a little bit of the interest cost for construction of a project, so there's that, but we can't pay for new bricks and mortar, essentially.
What about loans? They make loans off of it?
No.
Can you pay for improvements, interior improvements, or just exterior facade type
No, it
improvements?
can be for interior.
Oh, it can,
renovation
okay.
projects, yes, absolutely. This is the way we structured the budget. Really, the main thing here is that bottom line, that total estimated project cost of 11.6. We can't vary significantly from that without going back and having a new public hearing. We can shift funds from individual line items if we need to, going through the process. What this really tells you is that we would anticipate this most significant amount of money going into, the categories where we put the most funds. So construction of public improvements, rehabilitation and reconstruction of those types of projects are the ones we think are probably going to receive the most TIF funds over time. Again, we've got flexibility in the line items, but we kind of capped that bottom line unless we conduct another public hearing and amend the plan at some future date.
Might just point out that our budget does escalate.
Yeah. There's a bunch of footnotes with this table essentially that says things like we can share money between the 2 TIFs, like that it is developer interest and those kind of costs are not included in this total, and those kind of things are footnoted.
Will there be any disadvantage to the initial TIF district by this being combined with the new TIF district?
No, they're actually physically separate, and there's a different clocks ticking on both of them, right? So the other one was created a couple of years ago.
Right.
This one is a little bit newer. There's advantage because we can share money between the 2 if we need to. We don't have to. So they're operated separately, just that you have the ability to transfer money between them if there's a need to at some point in the future. So again, as I mentioned, it was set up for 23 years. You could end it early if you've accomplished everything and there's no reason to continue it, then you shouldn't continue it. There are actually provisions in TIF statute where if after 7 years you haven't done anything, then the TIF should go away by statute, so that's provided in there too. It is certainly consistent with your comprehensive plan and the downtown plan that we created, and there's provisions and notes in here about impact on taxing bodies. We aren't projecting any significant major residential projects or anything in this particular TIF, so we don't think there's going to be significant impact on the different taxing bodies. We held the joint review board back in October. Mike, you maybe want to talk a little bit more to that, but essentially we didn't really get any major concerns from the taxing bodies that showed up to the meeting, so they seemed to be comfortable with it.
No.
No?
And only, well, 2 taxing bodies showed up. Western Springs and the Western Springs Park District.
No objections, and a favorable recommendation from that body to move forward with the creation of the TIF.
So, obviously, there's a very involved process of doing this. We've been following all the requirements of statute. There's been all kinds of notifications to property owners in the TIF and surrounding the TIF, public notice in the newspaper, documents put on file. So we're nearing the end of this process. You won't be acting on this tonight. We have to wait for at least 14 days until after the close of the public hearing to act. So this is really just a public hearing to explain what's being proposed, answer questions, and take it from there. So that's the presentation. Happy to answer any questions you have or the public has.
Any questions?
The only thing we are going to be taking action on tonight is what back in August when we released the draft TIF plan report, we noticed a couple minor typos, nothing significant. And then there were 4 PIN numbers that were actually tied to 2 underlying pins. They relate to condominiums. We have cleaned up the document and we have added those 4 PIN numbers. And so tonight there's a resolution not to approve the creation of the TIF, but just to approve the amendments to the TIF plan and eligibility report. We ask that you take action on that. And then absent any other issues or concerns, you'll take final action on the ordinances. There's 3 of them that form the TIF and authorize the TIF funding vehicle on December 16th. So that will be the next step.
Okay. Thank you. So just to give a status update, there was a public meeting of the Joint Board of Review on October 10th to review and discuss the establishment of the Western Springs North TIF District, Tax Increment Financing District. There were 3 members in attendance: Dennis Conway from the Western Springs Park District, resident Deb Lyons was the public representative, and I attended that meeting. These Joint Review Board members unanimously voted to recommend approval of the TIF district after finding that the redevelopment project area and program and the redevelopment plan satisfied the plan requirements, eligibility criteria, and objectives of the Illinois Tax Increment Allocation Redevelopment Act. At this point in time, I'd like to open up the meeting to the public. If anyone would like to address the board specifically with regard to establishing the tax increment financing district on the north side.
Just a quick question.
Can you come up, please, sir? Thank you.
Jeff, actually, my wife Terry and I own the Hillgrove and Central Shopping Center.
Oh, okay.
Is it possible to get a copy of that presentation?
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Email or regular mail.
Yeah, Marty Scott, the Community Development Director.
He has our information.
Yeah, we'll make sure you get not only a copy of this TIF presentation, but the redevelopment plan,
Right.
so you can see what's in there.
Appreciate that.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hello, Klaus Cook again.
Hi, Klaus.
And I did get the public notice, so thank you for sending that out, but I'm sort of late to the game here. As the village, from what I can tell, basically becomes landowners, they're gonna be acquiring properties possibly, and things like that, assembling lots for redevelopment. using the money for
Potentially,
that.
we have not discussed that at all, but.
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking is what kind, if that happens, I mean, some of these sites include the village's municipal yard, a dry cleaner's, a now closed auto repair shop. What kind of financial liabilities does the village assume regarding cleanup of contaminants and things like that? Because that can be astronomical depending on what's underground.
Absolutely, and this is all conjecture, and we certainly would look at that before we make any decision to spend public funds on acquiring properties. So, yeah, we.
But I mean, isn't that more the property owner, the current property owner's problem, financial responsibility to clean that up, rather than the village spending possibly TIF dollars for doing that?
Yeah, I mean.
We haven't had any discussions about the village acquiring any property there.
Okay.
So,
Well, I mean, it's part of the plan that the village may assemble parcels and acquire properties and things
Yes.
like that. So that's part of what is possible in this TIF district.
It's possible in every TIF district, because that's
Yes.
what the TIF statute allows, but whether the village goes down that path is, to be seen. And, but there is no plan, as we sit here today, to target or acquire any particular
Well,
property.
no, I'm not saying that there is. I
Right.
just wanted to know if the village does, if that's a route they take, does that open, I mean, who knows what's underground with some of these sites and, some of the other ones? What kind of exposure does that
Right.
open up to the village financially?
And these are all discussions we will have before we take any action, if we take any action at all, which, is not even on the horizon right now. So it's all pure conjecture, but we certainly would be very prudent with those TIF dollars, just like we are with all of our residents' dollars.
Well, and then sort of the same realm, I'm an architect, so they, with possibly acquiring properties, there was discussion of code issues, accessibility issues and things like that. Again, is that the current property owner's issues for correcting those things rather than, possibly using TIF dollars to do that? Maybe that's all in combination with beautifying a certain piece of property, doing a facade renovation, streetscapes or things like that. Shouldn't that be the property owner's financial responsibility to do those code upgrades?
Well, potentially, but really the reason for establishing TIFs is to inspire our business community to rehabilitate and bring up to code buildings that may be considered obsolete right now because they don't have those modern amenities that everyone's looking for. So it's really just it's an incentive to help rehabilitate our business district. And so if that falls into the approved categories of what TIF dollars can be spent on, we'll make a decision at that time. And I see no problem with doing that if it helps to revitalize our downtown and business district.
Well, we're not gonna be taking the obligation of somebody else to shore up their property. It's not, you can't use the TIF dollars for private investment,
For private improvement.
private improvement.
I mean, let's talk about this, Klaus, for instance. Let's just put this kind of in an example. You talked about taking care of code issues. If the village implements a facade improvement program in this TIF and funds that with TIF dollars, people who have code issues with their facades could come to the village, apply for a facade improvement loan. It's usually a 50-50 program. The property owner would pay half of the cost. The village would pay using TIF dollars the other half of the cost. Remember, the TIF increment, the dollars that are used to incentivize redevelopment, is really a return of private dollars that are invested in property that increase the property value. So it is really a return on private investment in a particular property. That's one way to look at it. The more you invest in a parcel, the more its EAV goes up, the more increment is generated, and that increment under the TIF law is supposed to be there to put back into the TIF district to, as President Gallagher said, inspire or encourage more economic development and more growth. So, you know, don't look at it as we're just using, you know, public money for private purposes. It's really, you're using TIF dollars.
Using the tax dollars that you've been collecting, and things like that. No, I understand that. It was more, I was throwing more about the text and the talk about the village acquiring properties, assembling properties.
Well,
whatever
that's just
the
because the
terminology
TIF, yeah,
they
that's
use
just
there.
because the TIF Act allows that as one of the eligible activities, you know. But it doesn't mean that the community necessarily will do that. Doesn't mean that we won't, but, you know, it has to be included in the menu of authority that the community reserves for itself in order to fully see the TIF through.
Yeah, again, I was concerned because the village's municipal department yard has been down there for who knows how long. You know, there are these other businesses, you know, if something is found on those sites, I mean, I've worked with sites where everything looks nice until you find a 55-gallon drum of who knows what buried there that they couldn't anticipate. And it seems like if the village has acquired that site, you're opening up the rest of the people in the TIF money for the cleanup costs for that site rather than possibly the village, possibly the automobile repair shop owner, previous owner, you know, things like that.
And but you're making the assumption that the village would acquire that and that liability, and that, you know, that is not, you know, that's not necessarily the case, right? You know, when property is purchased, whether it's by a local government or a private entity, and it's commercial, or it has a use like you talk about, typically that you do an environmental assessment and report, and they figure out what the status of the property is, and then that's dealt with by the parties as part of the negotiating the purchase price. Who's gonna pay for the cleanup, and how much the purchase price is gonna be adjusted to deal with the cleanup costs.
Okay.
So those are all things that are on the village's awareness when it comes to, you know, either buying or selling property.
Okay. I was just a little thrown about all the language in there about the village acquiring properties, assembling parcels, and. You know,
Understood.
You know, I wasn't sure if the village had the right to use eminent domain to take properties to assemble a larger parcel that may be more desirable to a developer.
Not under this TIF.
No, not under, we can't use an eminent domain to acquire private property for private development purposes. The Illinois Supreme Court said that's no longer allowed.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Chuck Goodman. I own 500 Hill Grove, part of 504 Hill Grove. Can we bring up that one that had the target areas that are colored?
Oh,
That.
that's it.
So like I see, for instance, I'm in that magenta on the far right-hand side. You know, obviously that's targeted at buildings that I own, our block owns, are in that square. How do we know what is planned for that area, or what is proposed for that area?
Oh,
Because, I mean, for instance, if we just go just to the west of there, they're like properties,
right.
like age,
Mhm.
but there's nothing planned for that. I'm just curious why.
Is this addressed in our redevelopment plan,
That,
Mike?
so this is an exhibit that's out of the downtown master plan. If you look at that, it has recommendations for each individual site, so that map would talk about it. But the other part of the answer to your question is, if you choose not to do anything different with your property, nothing different's gonna happen, okay? This is really a tool that you could use if you wanted to redevelop the property. This is a tool that the village could partner with you to do that. If you choose to continue to use the property just as you are, that's fine too.
Right. I mean, again, it was interesting that property that I own was included in that, and other properties that are very similar in age.
Mm.
Functionality were not included. I used as something that the master plan is planning for, proposing for the area that I'm in. I don't know.
Well, that is available online, right? The master plan. So If you'd like to go into more detail, you can find it online.
Okay, because I get a little nervous when they talk about assembling properties. It's like,
Well, we will not, we will, that is truly something that is not even on our radar. So that's just something that the TIF authorizes, and so it was included in this presentation.
Now, also they talked about facade rehabilitation. Is that something that is planned for this TIF project or considered for this?
Again, like Mr. Hoffman said, that all of this is, TIF is a tool. It's a tool that puts a pool of money in for redevelopment of the TIF area. And if you choose to take advantage of that, you can partner with the village to make any improvement, or make some improvements, eligible improvements.
They talk about like a 50-50. Is that if I see something that I think would improve my property, and I apply for TIF funds for that, does that, the TIF would be roughly 50%?
Is it 50-50?
I use that merely as an example because many communities that have facade improvement programs have a 50-50 program. The village doesn't have one yet, but that would be sort of the next stage after the TIF is created. The village staff will probably come back with recommendations as to what type of incentive, localized incentive programs would be available for properties within this TIF, and that may be one of them.
And one other thing that comes to mind is, I mean, I know there are some vacant pieces of property that are being developed, just a few doors down from me. And it's like, okay, is that TIF funds, what is in the master plan? Do they want to put up new buildings? Do they want to rehabilitate existing buildings? I mean, I have a very old building that's in the area, which could probably use a little bit of work. And I'm just curious, is like, are those funds going to go toward developing new properties or rehabilitating old ones? Or is it just, we don't really know?
Remember, and this is a pay-as-you-go TIF that was mentioned in Mike's presentation.
Okay.
In order to have money to spend to incentivize redevelopment, we need to have the increment, the EAV in the TIF district increase. So if nothing happens, say in the next 2 or 3 years, there won't be any money to spend. But if a mini Tischler's happens, somebody takes one of those vacant properties and builds a new structure, that will dramatically increase the EAV once that building is built, and that will
Okay,
start.
so basically set the baseline, and any improvements after that baseline is, will go toward.
We'll go into the special fund for spending throughout the TIF for other eligible projects.
Okay, something that's new to me.
I would also suggest if you have any ideas to contact Marty Scott in
Okay.
Community
Yeah.
Development.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board this evening? Okay. Any discussion by the village board and trustees? No? All right, in that case, I'll adjourn the public hearing. And we'll move on now to the special portion of tonight's meeting with the explanation of the omnibus voting procedure. The Illinois state statutes allow a municipality to collectively vote on a group of ordinances, resolutions, and other motions such as awards of contract, appointments, etc. This is known as an omnibus vote. All the items contained on the omnibus vote list have been previously discussed by the President and Board of Trustees on at least one occasion and often on several occasions. By placing them on the omnibus vote list, a single vote may be taken to approve them. A trustee may remove any item from the list and have it discussed and voted on separately prior to the omnibus vote. Is there any such request?
I did have a question
Sure.
about the number 10 here, what we discussed with trustee Finks with the making the amendment to any Saturday, whatever, have to remove that to make the amendment.
I put some notes together. Can I just read it real quick?
Right.
And if you adopt it, you can just go with this. So
Okay.
instead of having the motion as it's written in your agenda, it would be a motion to approve contractors for the 2019 MFT asphalt resurfacing project and well number 5 transmission main to work beyond regular construction hours as set forth in section 5-2-3 of the village code to complete the projects during the 29 construction season.
2019.
I'm sorry, 2019 construction season.
Is it Saturdays? Do they have to work on Saturdays?
That would allow them to work either longer on weekdays or longer on the weekends to get the project done, and I would assume the contractors will work when it's most advantageous to them.
Yeah, and we have a coordination process where they would notify staff as part of our contract, and then we would post through our notification to residents as appropriate.
So it may behoove them to work longer on a Thursday or a Friday and not work on a weekend, or work on a Saturday, earlier or later. So if we leave it sort of open like that, a little more flexibility, it may give them more opportunity to finish this year.
And so for that, can trustee Terrell just say the motion as read by Attorney Jerusik, or does he?
That would be fine.
Okay. Are you okay with that?
Fine with that, thank you.
Great. Thank you. In that case, I'll hand it over to you, trustee Terrell.
Thank you, President Gallagher. I would have a motion to approve the following ordinances and/or motions. Ordinance 19-2978, approving minor amendments to the Western Springs Downtown North Tax Increment Financing District redevelopment plan and program prepared by Tesca Associates, Inc., dated August 2019. I also have a motion to authorize and approve preventative maintenance work on well number 4. Resolution 19-2512, authorizing and approving a budget amendment and transfers over $10,000 to the fiscal year 2019 operating budget in the water fund for preventative maintenance on well number 4. And finally, as discussed, a motion to ratify the approval of contractors for the 2019 MFT asphalt resurfacing project and the well number 5 transmission main, who worked beyond the regular construction hours as just set forth by Attorney Jerusik.
Thank you, trustee Terrell. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? Clerk Horvath, may we have the roll call vote?
Yes, Madam President. Trustee Terrell.
Aye.
Sifferman.
Aye.
Trustee Rudolph.
Aye.
Trustee John.
Aye.
Trustee Fink.
Aye.
Trustee Chen.
Aye.
And President Gallagher.
Aye.
All matters have passed.
Thank you. Moving on to our reports. First, my report. The Council of Mayors Executive Committee met on October 29 at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP, offices. CMAP has a new Chief of Staff, Amy McEwen. Several items were reported on, and under the new funding criteria, no council of government receives less than $3 million for STP local grant funds. That's the federal funding mechanism to bring grants into our communities. Our council receives just over $3 million, and that's based on roads, road conditions and uses. Not conditions, but uses, road uses. Last Tuesday, the Field Park Cub Scouts came in to see Village Hall, and they took a tour of the boardroom. They asked good questions about the role of the board in local governance, and then they met with Bill Tonzik, who explained the history behind our flag, and I hope we have some future trustees in that group. Since we last met, 3 new businesses in town have opened up. Guac and Tacos, Skinovatio, located on the 2nd floor of the Harris Bank Building, and the McDonald Brothers Architecture and Construction at 608 Hillgrove. So let's extend a warm welcome to all. And finally, this past Saturday, Clerk Horvath, my husband Terry, and I attended the Western Springs Fire and Rescue Association dinner celebrating our fire department's 125th anniversary. It was a very fun and informative event with a digital history presented. That history was put together by our own communications managers, Selman Cesek, and resident historian John Devona, and was narrated by former Deputy Chief Gary Mayer. Did I leave anybody out in that production, Chief?
Director Pat Schramm was huge on that one
Oh,
also.
thank you. Of course he was.
Or we'd have been in big trouble.
All things digital. Thank you. It was very heartwarming to see the members of the fire department, both past and present, receive a little recognition for the sacrifices they make protecting their neighbors. So thank you, Chief. It was a wonderful evening. And that concludes my report. Manager Velkme?
Thank you, President Gallagher. First of all, I just wanted to thank our finance director and assistant finance director, Grace and John, for all the work that they have done on the draft budget. Without them, I don't know where we would be. So thank you so very much on that. Also, with regard to our strategic plan today, our directors returned their comments on the strategic plan, and Director Bear will be sending out the document for you to rank. So when we rank the goals and so forth. So she hopes to get that out as soon as possible this week. So, and that concludes my report for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Jerusik?
No report tonight.
Great. In that case, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
That we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ladies and gentlemen, we stand adjourned. Good evening.
I just checked.
Oh, are you kidding?